Summer 1923. Harold Levinson. The American man got to his feet and held out a hand to Milo. She looked across Thomas, and Mr. Levinson diverted his handshake to him. "Thomas Barrow," he said, stiffly. "And this is me, Lucina Ashby." Behind them, words in hushed tones came across to her ears as Mrs. Crawley stood up. Milo noticed Daisy, and gave her a half-smile while keeping the rest of her attention on Mr. Levinson. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Ashby," he told her. "And I am pleased to meet you," Milo told him. And, for a young woman who had been talking to Mr. Levinson, got to her feet. "Madeline Alsop, and this is my father, Viscount Isgarth." "Delighted," said the Viscount, not at all sounding like it. Milo turned her head and smiled, not really meaning it. "Miss Ashby," Mrs. Crawley declared, "whatever brings you to London?" But before she could answer, from behind the Dowager came a voice, and she turned to see Daisy waving to her. "Milo," she called. "Look, Jimmy." "It's Milo." "Good to see you," Milo told them, as Thomas glowered at his colleagues. "Daisy, go back to your work," Mrs. Crawley whispered. "I am sure you will get to see her soon." But Daisy's face fell, and it looked as if she was about to argue, then thought better of it. "Hello, I know you," Mrs. Levinson called out. "The young woman who is a dream with radio, you know. I told you, Harold, this is my son, Harold," Mrs. Levinson enthused. "She was doing an experiment with transmitters. Her cousin is Mr. Marconi." "Of course I know who that is." Harold Levinson matched the enthusiasm of his mother. "And, did your experiment work?" Milo nodded, not quite sure how to take the outspokenness of the pair. Outspokenness in the upper classes was not at all expected. "It is being verified," Milo told them. "I am hoping it shows that radio signals can be relayed over distance, making the broadcasting wider-ranging." "And you are at Cambridge?" "With Professor Rutherford, no less," Martha Levinson went on. "It's the young lady I told you about, Harold," Martha Levinson encouraged. "I have told her we have Henrietta Wolfe Smythe in the family, a physicist too." She leaned towards Milo. "If you ever come to America, my dear, you are welcome to stay with us." Milo smiled, meaning it this time, considering what to say. She chose, "That is very good of you, Your Grace," ignoring Violet Crawley's snort of derision at her choice of title. The Dowager followed up with, "Why not go with Your Majesty next time?" To which Mrs. Levinson replied, "Smart idea." But Harold Levinson had not taken his eyes off Milo for a second, and they twinkled at her. "She works for Ernest Rutherford." "With Professor Rutherford," Milo told them. "I have 2 papers published," she added, "one in progress related to short-range relay transmitters." "Have you indeed?" Harold Levinson marveled. "And what sees you in London, Miss Ashby?" Mrs. Crawley asked, and Milo was glad to be able to turn from the radium gaze of Mr. Levinson. "The professor was at the Royal Institution giving a lecture last night. I knew Thomas, that is, Mr. Barrow was in London too." "You and he being friends," Mrs. Levinson continued, and Milo looked at her and smiled. "Well, after that awful business with the servant who broke your transmitter," Mrs. Levinson continued, as Milo's heart sank. She had quite put aside any anger towards Mr. Bates about that, but the lady pressed on, "I hope he was sacked, dreadful man." At this she looked at Thomas. "He was dealt with, by his lordship," he told Martha Levinson. "Say," she continued, "this evening, a cousin of Robert's has her coming out party. She has been to the palace and's all Miss Rose Maclaire." "Lady Rose Marclair," the Dowager corrected. Mrs. Levinson ignored her. "Do you know her, Miss Ashby?" "She does not," Violet Crawley declared to the world. Martha Levinson turned her back towards the Dowager Countess just a fraction and looked at Milo, waiting for an answer. Milo shook her head. "I don't, Your Grace." A snort from the Dowager, but Mrs. Levinson ignored that, too. "Say, why don't you come tonight? If you haven't plans with your friend, Mr. Barrow?" She nodded to Thomas. "I am serving, madam," Thomas told her. "Then you accept." And a cold dread fell over Milo, as all eyes were on her. "I have nothing to wear, Mrs. Levinson," Milo told her, gravely. "So you have that nice dress of dear Sybil's?" "Not any longer, Mrs. Levinson." Thomas reached for her hand and held it firmly. "So I am sorry to say." But Martha Levinson waved a hand at her in dismissal. "Nonsense. We can find you something ... You're tall. We can fix you up real nice. Something in salmon ... or chartreuse." But Milo turned to Thomas, who gave her a blank expression. "No help from her husband then?" "I think that's a marvelous idea," Mrs. Crawley told her. "Mr. Barrow," she added, and he nodded to her, "if you would accept Miss Ashby, why don't you come back with us?" 88,888,888. The picnic hamper arrived back into the kitchen of Grantham House and Jimmy and Daisy were unpacking it. Ethan Slade was supposed to be helping, but instead, he was talking to anyone who would listen. "When you said the memorial was going to be big, I did not expect it to be that big." He watched as Mr. Molesley nodded to him as he came in. "She's sure Mr. loved him, the Queen," he added, to Mrs. Patmore. "Well, she wore black for the remainder of her life and set a place for him at her dinner table for Prince Albert, so yes, I would say that she did." Daisy rolled her eyes at him as he turned away, and shook her head to Jimmy as they carried the plates through to the washroom. Then the funniest thing happened. A woman who old girl Levinson seemed to know has come back to the house for the dance. A woman that Mrs. Levinson knew, Mrs. Patmore repeated. "What was her name, then?" "Miss Ashby, I think," Ethan said. "Miss Ashby, oh!" Mrs. Patmore exclaimed. "Oh, Daisy," she said, hurrying through into the passageway. "Is it true you met Miss Ashby?" "Milo." "Yes," Daisy replied. "She were with Thomas. And she's coming back here for Lady Rose's dance." This caused a clatter in the washroom and Daisy hurried out. "What? Really? I didn't know that." She stalked over to Ethan. "How is it that you know that and I don't?" "I think you were packing some of the boxes," Ethan admitted, and waited for Daisy to give him her customary frown. "Wow!" Daisy screamed, grinning from ear to ear, and she turned to the cook. "Did you hear, Mrs. Patmore? Milo's coming here." "Please, please, can she come down here so we can catch up? Or I can go up and see her." "It's been over a year since I last saw her and 3 months since her last letter." "Who is she?" Ethan asked, folding up the tablecloth that had come out wrinkled in the picnic hamper. But Daisy ignored him, and crossed to Mr. Molesley. "It's Milo," she told him. "She's coming here, to the party." Joseph Molesley looked up from shining the spirit labels and looked at Daisy. "Who?" "Yes, she's here," said Thomas Barrow, bringing through a tray of crockery. An expression of concern was on his features. "Do you think she'll come to Brighton tomorrow?" Daisy asked Thomas, then, without waiting for a reply, added, "Oh, won't it be brilliant at the seaside?" "Do say she can, Mr. Barrow, and she can come." "That's up to her, of course," said Thomas, stiffly, and thought about the night ahead. Would she be able to cope? It would take a lot of presence on her part. Mrs. Crawley should have considered that. Although, if she was just going to observe, that would be different. Except Tom Branson, and she had told him he had raped her. He'd be there that night. Thomas considered how she would react. It depended on the role she was being asked to play. If he told some of the staff to look out for her, with him, if she was getting nervous or edgy, they could help her away. Was concerned how she was going to react. "Think how you will feel?" Thomas asked her later, when he slipped up from the kitchen, finding Milo in Lady Mary's room, where Mrs. Levinson had put her. She looked, well, beautiful, frankly. Some of her hair had been taken up at the sides and away from her face, and she had been given a band to wear in it. The dress Milo stood up in was a peacock blue, a sparkling overlay over a crepe dress, which set off her opals beautifully. And her necklace, well, Thomas saw that she was wearing the lavalier he had given her at Christmas. "Your cufflinks look lovely in this light," Milo told him, glancing around the room, first at the light fittings, and then at the switch. "No," Thomas told her, firmly. "What?" she asked. "No, the lights do not need adjusting, rewiring, repositioning, or any other dozen things that you are thinking of that do not need doing. It will just delay you coming down." He continued to look firm. "Why would you think that Milo began. because ... I know you, Miss Ashby, Thomas told her, and crossed to Milo, taking up her hand, then kissing her on the cheek. How will you be, with him in the room? He asked, far more quietly. Mr. Branson? She whispered back. Mr. Branson, Thomas confirmed, and his heart sank as she dropped his hand. She always did that when she was nervous. I feel ... nothing ... about it, Thomas, Milo confided, wide eyes upon him. If I am supposed to be angry, then I am deficient, she added. As long as you are sure, Thomas told her, and she nodded. He retreated when he saw it was Lady Rose, and nodded to her as she went in. Mr. Carson, I need to talk to you, Thomas told the butler. Is it urgent? He asked, dismissively. Then he stopped. Miss Ashby, here, he declared. And where to put her? That is precisely my point, Thomas replied, smoothly. My Isage is the Grand Hotel around the corner. And that she leaves now? Thomas gave him a peevish smile. That is hardly fair on Miss Ashby, Mr. Carson, he told the butler, coldly. It was Mrs. Levinson who invited her, and Mrs. Crawley. Do you remember what happened last time that Miss Ashby was left in a confused state of mind because of conflicting instructions? He left that hang between them, not needing the sting to his monologue, which was that she could share with him. Carson stepped back, and lowered his head in concession. I will talk to Mrs. Hughes, he told Thomas. But I just don't know where she will go. I really don't. Upstairs, and the reality was getting to Milo. She had wanted to come to see Thomas and share with him her feelings about Tom Branson. She was not prepared for being asked to join in something she hadn't been invited to, especially of a young woman she had never before met. Can you get me out of here? She whispered to the lady who had come into Lady Mary's room. Of course. Rose beamed, amazed at the sight of Miss Ashby in front of her. She had been told scant details of her time at Downton, that she was known, and was at a loose end. I'll leave a note, Milo said, looking about her for something to write with, and on. You will do no such thing, Rose declared. But I barely know this Lady Rose, Milo replied. And she does not know me. She looked at Rose. It's a funny thing, to be accepted at the palace as a symbol of things, Milo added. I think it is not as grand as you think it is, said Rose, looking with renewed interest at Milo. Is she a pretty lady? I couldn't say. And Milo took some steps towards her. Mrs. Levinson asked me to come. She knew me at Downton, Milo explained. Forgive me. I don't know you. When were you at Downton? I have been there many times. My brother electrified it, Milo told her, happiness on her face at the happiness of remembering Ernest. You're her, aren't you? The physicist? My cousin told me all about you. Milo wriggled as she made some steps towards her, the dress being a little short and a little big, and she was shuffling around in it. Oh Mon, I can help you with the dress. Oh, I don't know ... Do you think Lady Rose will mind? Milo asked her, seriously, as Rose smoothed down the fabric and made it fit over her waist and hips. I don't mind a bit, Rose told her. But the usual picking up of small details irritated Milo then, for she was concerned with her own self-image and, more importantly, what to say to people if they started to talk to her. Can I go in a different way? Milo asked. She would be happier down the back stairs and in at the far end. Rose stopped and looked back to Milo, shocked. What's the point in that? The point of looking as you do is to make an entrance, Miss Ashby. But Milo was fretting more now, and as she reached the bottom of the staircase, realized in horror there was something else. I have no one to go in with, Milo gasped, when she saw everyone with partners. She searched in vain for Thomas. You can come with me, Miss Ashby, said Mrs. Crawley by her ear, then turned to look to Rose. Thank you for bringing her down, Lady Rose, she added, and beamed. You look lovely, Miss Ashby.